Rancher lived alone for years, until the Bigfoot brought back his father's rifle. Before we begin, take a moment to drop a comment below. Where are you watching from today? And once the story is over, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Now settle in and enjoy the story. I thought my father's last keepsake was lost forever, until that morning. Rocky Mountains, late winter. Thick fog hung heavy, nearly swallowing the entire valley. The ranch yard lay silent beneath a thin blanket of snow. No horse hooves, no whispering wind. Lawson Reed opened the door, his breath immediately turning to white mist. And then he saw it, the old rifle his father used to carry, resting right there on the wooden porch, its stock worn and etched faintly with the name J.R., faded by time. Beside it, fresh in the new snow, were enormous footprints, leading straight into the depths of the forest. His heart pounded fiercely. The past had returned in a way he had never imagined. I had accepted that I would never see it again. Early morning on the edge of the Rocky Mountains, the sky hadn't fully brightened yet. Lawson Reed's breath dissolved into white clouds in the biting cold air. He was used to mornings like this just himself, the stable and the whispering wind through the pine trees. For years, he had learned to live without expecting anything to return, especially not his father's old rifle, lost forever in the flood that swept it away. But then in the stillness came the sound of heavy footsteps, slow, approaching the porch. The wooden boards creaked beneath a weight heavier than any man's. If you were there in this isolated place on a foggy morning, hearing footsteps, whether human or something else, on your porch, would you open the door or keep it locked tight? Part 1. The Gift at the Door. Morning mist clung to Lawson's silver hair as he creaked open the wooden door. The cold air hit his face, making his already tired eyes sting. Outside, a thin blanket of snow covered the porch, reflecting the weak, silvery light of the winter dawn. And there it lay silent upon the weathered wooden planks, a Winchester rifle, its dark wooden stock worn and scarred in ways only someone who'd held it a lifetime would recognize. At the end of the stock, faint initials J.R. blurred by time's futile attempts to erase them. Lawson froze, his breath caught, not sure if it was the cold or the sudden tightening of his heart. It had been years since that night when the black floodwater swept away everything: his mother, his father, the old home, and the only rifle his father had kept as part of himself. He had believed it lost forever beneath the icy river. Now it lay here again, right before his eyes, neither dusty nor rusted, as if someone had guarded it carefully all these years, then placed it at his doorstep on a foggy morning. His hand trembled as it reached out. The wood was cold, not from the weather but from the past, from the years he tried to forget, but never could. Old memories surged: the tall, broad-shouldered figure of his father, standing by the stable on an autumn afternoon, the rifle slung over his shoulder, the scent of gunpowder mingling with dry grass. The early mornings when his father taught him to clean the barrel oil, the parts every motion deliberate like a sacred ritual. And his voice, deep, reserved, but warm. Son, a rifle's not just for hunting. It's to remind you where you belong. Lawson closed his eyes, gripping the stock tighter, feeling the moisture on his hand wasn't just melting snow. He swallowed hard, his throat clogged with an invisible stone. As he lowered the rifle, his gaze drifted over the snow-covered porch. That's when he saw them giant footprints, twice the size of any man's, pressed deep into the snow. They led from the forest edge to the porch, then turned away, disappearing into the thick fog. He squinted after them, his heart pounding louder. He had heard the stories, the whispered legends of a giant lurking in the depths of the Rocky Mountains. Bigfoot. Witnesses swore its size defied imagination, and its eyes were not those of a wild beast, but ones that understood humanity. He never believed, until this morning. Lawson set the rifle down on the wooden table inside the cabin. He sat, eyes never leaving it, as if blinking would make it vanish again. He unlocked the chamber and pulled back the bolt, empty. But the sling was heavier than usual. Flipping it over, he found a small leather pouch tied with rough twine. Inside were a few old bullets, their tips tarnished but intact. Someone or something had kept this relic safe all these years, long enough to preserve it, then returned it to him. But why, and why now? Outside, the mist began to lift, revealing pale golden rays filtering through the pines. Lawson gazed out the window, his eyes distant. He knew some questions would never be answered, but sometimes not all mysteries need solving. If this morning at your doorstep lay the last keepsake of a loved one, and alongside it giant footprints leading deep into the woods, what would you do? Guard the secret, or follow the trail? Part 2. Clues from the forest. The mist had thinned by the time Lawson stepped off the porch, the old rifle slung across his shoulder. His hand instinctively brushed the worn wooden stock, grounding himself with the reality of its weight. Beneath his boots, the snow cracked and crunched dryly, but his eyes were drawn to the massive footprints etched deeply in front of him. They led straight out of the yard, crossed the faded wooden gate, and vanished into the dense pine forest beyond. Each print pressed so deep that the melting edges glistened before freezing solid again, a weight no human could bear. Lawson stopped crouching down to compare his own foot to the print. It was only half the length and less than a third as wide. A sharp gust swept through the mountain pass, carrying the scent of pine resin and the damp, earthy chill of mossy stone. He stared into the dark line of trees where the forest began sensing something, or someone, watching him, waiting to see if he'd dare follow. What would you do standing on the edge of the wilderness, faced with the tracks of a legendary creature? Would you step forward or turn back? Lawson tightened the rifle strap and stepped into the woods. The snow lay thick along the narrow path, flanked by towering pines so tall their tops vanished into the mist. Early morning light filtered down in thin beams, slicing through the haze like blades of silver. The enormous footprints marked each deliberate step, straight and unhurried, like the creature knew exactly where it was going and feared nothing behind it. With every step deeper into the forest, Lawson's heartbeat grew louder, not from the cold, but from the heavy silence. No bird song, no cracking twigs, only the crunch of snow underfoot and the growing distance between prints ahead. Each time he glanced down, memories of his father's hands flashed before him, big, rough hands that had left just as deep an imprint on his life. Some paths, he thought, don't just lead to hidden answers, they lead back to buried memories. The footprints guided him to a gentle slope where two sheer rock walls squeezed the pines into a narrow corridor. The wind howled through the crevice, producing a low, hollow sound like a deep breath taken somewhere unseen. Lawson paused, his hand resting lightly on the rifle, not to shoot, but for the comfort of something familiar. Suddenly, a deep, lingering echo rolled out from the mountain pass, neither wolf howl nor bear growl. It carried a rhythm like a call, or a response. It wasn't threatening, but it stirred a strange ache in his chest, as if reminding him of something lost. Lawson stood still, closing his eyes to listen more closely. The echo faded, surrendering to silence. He opened his eyes to see the footprints disappearing into the shadowed pass ahead. He knew he couldn't go further, at least not today. Some secrets, when forced, vanish forever. He stepped back, feeling both like he was giving up and holding on to a fragile thread. Lawson turned back, retracing his steps along the snowy trail now marked by his own footprints running parallel to the giant tracks. Each step felt heavier, not just from the deep snow, but from the sense that he was leaving behind something unnamed, something intangible. Midday light filtered down more freely, making the frost on the pine branches sparkle like shards of glass. He wondered if whoever or whatever had left those prints had done so deliberately, just for him to see. But see what an invitation, a warning, or simply a message. I was here. Every time the wind blew, Lawson found himself glancing back toward the mountain pass, half expecting to catch a glimpse of a figure emerging through the mist. But all that greeted him were the silent rows of pines and the mournful whistle of wind against stone. When he reached the ranch gate, the massive footprints outside the porch had already begun to fade beneath a fresh dusting of snow. Lawson stood there watching the path he'd walked slowly disappear into white nothingness. He knew the answers lay beyond the forest's edge. But this morning, what he carried back was not the truth, only a feeling. A feeling that someone out there still remembered him and had found a way to leave a sign just for him. He traced his fingers along the wooden stock of his rifle, feeling the worn grain beneath his fingertips. Sometimes he thought not all clues are meant to be solved right away. Some secrets must remain like a flame in the night, only burning bright when you have the patience to wait. If you were Lawson, would you return to the forest tomorrow, or let those footprints vanish into the snow? Part 3. The threat closes in late afternoon. The sky deepened into a rich purple, the last light of day clinging to the pine tops like fading embers. Lawson sat at the wooden table, carefully wiping the grooves of his rifle when a heavy pounding rattled the door, not a polite knock. This was urgent, almost violent, like someone was trying to tear the hinges off. He set the rifle down and moved toward the door, fingers instinctively brushing the lock. Outside, through the thick wooden barrier, came heavy footsteps stomping on the porch and labored breathing. Then a hoarse, mountain-accented voice called out, "Open up, Reed. We know you're in there." Lawson took a steady breath. The smell of smoke and cold air rushed in as he cracked the door open. 3 men stood there, worn leather jackets, gloved hands, hunting rifles slung over shoulders. Their eyes weren't those of visitors, they belonged to hunters chasing something far bigger than game. If you were in his place on a late afternoon like this, knowing they weren't just after an animal, but after your secret, would you fling the door wide open or shut it tight? Lawson planted himself firmly in the doorway, blocking the cold wind and shadows from spilling inside. The man in the center, likely their leader, leaned forward slightly, voice low but firm. "We've been tracking it all week. Big. Really big. Never seen footprints that deep. And..." He glanced toward the Winchester resting on the table inside. "We hear someone got their stuff back." Lawson's face stayed cold as ice, but his hand clenched tightly inside his jacket pocket. "What exactly are you looking for?" "Information. Or better, a lead to its den. A place packed with what it's taken: guns, knives, metal things. Probably more than you think." His tone wasn't a direct threat, but the emphasis on den made Lawson feel it clearly. If he spoke, there'd be no turning back for that creature. The moment stretched taut like a wire between 2 cliffs. Lawson knew just one word from him, and they'd surround the forest and the creature would vanish. Or worse. The man's gaze locked onto Lawson's, waiting. Behind him, 2 others shifted their weight, gloved hands, inching toward their rifle stocks, silently warning that they were ready. In Lawson's mind flashed the morning's image: his father's old rifle resting on the snow-covered porch, the giant footprints leading into the woods. He didn't understand why it was returned, but he knew this without some measure of trust it would never have appeared on his doorstep. He drew in a deep breath, relaxed his shoulders, and let his voice fall calm and even. "No, I haven't seen anything unusual. Just snow horses and me." His words sank into thick silence. A cold wind slid through, carrying the scent of pine and old gunpowder. The man in the middle narrowed his eyes as if trying to see through Lawson's words. He tilted his head slightly, then gave a subtle nod toward the 2 men behind him. "Let's go." Heavy boots clattered across the wooden porch, fading as they moved down the yard. The clang of a rifle stock striking the saddle hook echoed in the cold air. Lawson stood in the doorway, watching them mount up and ride off in another direction, their figures swallowed by the dark pines. But he knew they hadn't given up. They were just searching for another way to circle back. He closed the door, bolted it tight, then turned back to the Winchester resting on the table. His fingers traced the faded letters JR carved into the stock, a weight both relieving and heavy settling in his chest. Outside, the sunset melted quickly into night, leaving a slate-gray sky. Inside the cabin, the fire flickered, casting dancing shadows over the worn wood. Lawson sank into his chair, eyes locked on the rifle. He knew he had just refused a chance, whether for money or at least some answers. But sometimes silence is the only way to protect what you believe is right. Outside, the wind picked up, howling stronger. Far off in the depths of the forest, a low, distant sound drifted, whether the wind through the mountain crevices or something else, something grateful Lawson couldn't tell. Part 4. The Silent. Thank you. That night, as the cold, steel-blue moonlight spread over the valley, Lawson wrapped himself in a thick coat, slung the old Winchester over his shoulder, and stepped out of the cabin. The snow crunched sharply beneath every step. In his hand he carried a small leather pouch with a few freshly polished bullets alongside a carefully wrapped bundle of jerky. The path to the edge of the forest was eerily silent. Only the wind whispered through the towering pines, a sound like a sigh from something that had lived longer than mankind itself. The moonlight cast a silvery blue sheen across the snow, cloaking everything in a mystical haze. Lawson stopped at the flat rock near the forest's edge, the very spot where he had seen those massive footprints vanish into the darkness. He placed the pouch of jerky and the polished bullets gently on the stone, treating the offering like a sacred gift laid before a loved one's altar. He stood upright, said nothing, made no gesture. He simply left the gift there and stepped back, eyes fixed on the deep shadows of the forest. If you were there alone in the silent night forest, leaving a gift for a creature you weren't sure was friend or foe, would you stay and wait or turn and leave immediately? Lawson remained standing, his breath billowing out in soft clouds in the bitter cold. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, from the black trunks of towering pines, a massive silhouette emerged, silent, not disturbing the snow beneath its feet, as if it had been there all along. The moonlight skimmed over broad shoulders and a thick, shaggy head of fur dusted with ice crystals that sparkled like glitter. No growl, no sign of threat, just a presence that made the air itself feel heavier, deeper. Lawson didn't move. He felt the space between them close enough that any step forward would be a choice. The creature stood still for a long moment, its deep eyes weighing the man before it. Then slowly it stepped toward the rock, bent down, and took the pouch of jerky and the bullets. Its fingers, or rather thick-clawed digits, brushed over the metal surface, as if recognizing the careful thought behind this gift. After gathering all that Lawson had left, the creature didn't turn away immediately. It stood tall, its broad shoulders casting long shadows on the snowy ground. Only the wind whispered through the mountain crevices, and the slow rhythm of its breathing echoed in the night. Lawson felt the tension drain from him, replaced by a strange calmness, like sitting silently beside his father's grave, sharing a conversation without words through a language that didn't need sound. Suddenly, that massive head dipped low, a simple motion, heavy with the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. It wasn't quite a bow nor a thank you, but more like a recognition. I understand. Without hurry, the creature turned and took long strides back into the forest. Moonlight traced its fresh footprints, linking seamlessly with the old prints Lawson had seen just that morning. The pine branches trembled as it passed, leaving behind the scent of resin and an inexplicable warmth in the cold night. Lawson stood rooted, watching until the silhouette faded into the mist. He realized his hand was clenched not from fear, but from a desire to hold on to that moment just a little longer. When only he and the bare rock remained, Lawson stepped forward and placed his hand on the cold snow. Where the pouch of jerky and bullets had lain, a faint imprint remained. He nodded softly, as if sealing a silent pact. As he made his way back, the moon still lit the path of white snow, but deeper in his chest, a brighter light stirred the strange feeling that the distance between two worlds had just shrunk, bridged by a small act. If you ever received the most precious thing from a hand you could never grasp, would you be ready to respond, even if only in silence? Part 5. The Returned Gift. The next morning, the sky hung pale and thin like a delicate silk stretched over the valley. The first warm rays of sunlight coaxed the morning mist to retreat layer by layer, dissolving into the air, revealing rows of dew-laden pines and patches of snow that shimmered with golden flecks. Lawson stepped out onto the porch, not exactly searching for anything, yet his eyes immediately drifted toward the edge of the forest where the rock sat. Last night, he had left everything there, and last night, the creature had taken it. Now, the snow before the rock held no clear footprints, just faint smudges where wind and mist had passed. But resting quietly in the center of the smooth stone was a small, dark object waiting. Lawson slowed his steps, curiosity and anticipation stirring like they had when he was a child, whenever his father handed him something mysterious, and new. On the rock, instead of the pouch of jerky and bullets, lay a small piece of wood about half the length of his palm. Lawson bent down and picked it up. It was a roughly carved image of a caribou. The antlers were etched with bold, deliberate strokes. The body was slightly off kilter, but every cut was confident, no hesitation, no doubt. The scent of fresh pine mingled with the warm, resinous aroma. He turned the carving over in his hand, feeling the rough edges trace his fingertips. Each mark seemed to carry meaning, a story the maker could not voice aloud. In that moment, Lawson felt as if he held a silent greeting from the other world. No words, no script, just a small form but brimming with acknowledgement. I see you. I remember too. Lawson stood still by the rock, the wooden caribou resting firmly in his calloused hand. The early morning chill seeped into his skin, but inside him, a quiet warmth spread like standing close to a fire after a long day out in the cold fields. Memories of his father flooded back, those winters spent tracking deer together, their footsteps soft in the snow, and the way his father taught him to read the forest's subtle signs. The forest will answer when you treat it like a friend, his father had said. Now that lesson wasn't just words. Lawson had witnessed it come alive through a creature the world still called a legend. He turned and made his way back to the cabin, each step pressing into the thin blanket of snow. The sky had brightened, sunlight spilling gently over the weathered porch. Entering the house, Lawson didn't set the caribou down on the table. Instead, he walked straight to the fireplace. Above it, his father's Winchester hung carefully on the wall. He took a small wooden peg, hammered it close by, and hung the caribou there. Side by side they stood, one, a relic of the past, the other, a gift from the present, two pieces from different worlds yet parts of the same story. The morning stretched on the fire, crackling softly, the aroma of hot coffee filling the room. Lawson settled into his chair, eyes resting on the two gifts hanging together. He didn't know if he'd ever see that creature again, but one thing was certain between him and that being, an invisible bond had formed stronger than any knot he'd tied on a saddle. Outside, the wind stirred the forest, carrying cold air and pine scents. But inside this cabin, warmth had found its refuge. If one day you received a gift from a hand you'd never touched, would you cherish it as part of yourself, or let it remain a mystery forever? Final part. The cabin's fireplace burned steadily, casting warm patches of light across the worn wooden walls. Just above it, the Winchester rifle, his father's, and the wooden caribou hung side by side, silent witnesses to a story only two beings knew: one man, one legend. Lawson sat quietly in his wooden chair, a steaming cup of coffee cradled in his rough hands. His gaze lingered on the rifle's stock, engraved with JR, and the rustic carvings on the wooden figure. No words were spoken, no promises made, but in that silence he understood that out there, beyond the bounds of human knowing, were things that couldn't be bought or bargained for, only granted to those patient enough to believe. Outside the window, snow drifted gently down, but inside, the warmth wasn't just from the fire, it came from an invisible thread, connecting his porch to the depths of the forest. Some gifts can't be bought, only received by those who keep faith. If a mysterious creature returned a family heirloom to you, what would you do? Share your thoughts and don't forget to rate this story.